All right, welcome to another episode of New Wine Uncorked, and we are coming to you live today on Facebook, which is cool. We've been doing Facebook Live, also YouTube Live, and one of these days we'll get it worked up to where I get the technology all working in, and we do live on both Facebook and YouTube. But well, that takes a little bit of how we learn everything today. I type it into one of my search browsers and my figure out how to do it. And so there's a way to do that. We will do that. But for those of you that are joining us right now on Facebook, all you have to do is you just right underneath there, click subscribe or like to the video. And then that way, anytime New Wine Uncorked, New Wine Tastings, anything from New Wine comes up on Facebook, that you will be notified. And same thing happens when we're on YouTube. You just hit that subscribe button, and then there's a bell by all of those where it's a notification, and that way you can be notified. And if you've been with us throughout these weeks, New Wine Uncorked is seeking to build relational bridges in contemporary culture. And we do this by seeking to engage current issues, things going on within culture today. And there's nothing greater right now. I guess there are a couple of competing greater things that are causing focus. First and foremost, Christmas. We're in the season of Christmas where you go around any of the stores and you see there's something going on, right? Some celebrations dealing with trees and lights and all that stuff. And around our neighborhood, people are getting super involved in it, and they're lighting up their houses and all that stuff. So that's one side of things. And then the other side is we have this thing called COVID that's been lingering around. Last year for our Christmas, we didn't get together with anyone because of the restrictions and the concerns. And what about this year? The rising numbers of cases and such with the Omicron and variants and all this kind of stuff. So we have all these forces coming together, and this is it going to be a creation of the perfect storm for Christmas where sicknesses abound, or is it a time where it's a creation of the perfect celebrations? And so we're talking about this today on continuing with the Christmas celebrations. Are Christians today, though, bearers of joy to the world? Or is the message sometimes the message of humbug, that pointing at things, and because we can't get our stuff correct? If you go into today's church, is there unity? Like Jesus calls for the church, that we are one, just as you, Father, that they are one, just as we, Father, are one. Is there that oneness? And so we want to continue this conversation because Lord knows that each one of us, I definitely need, and I think each of my three counterparts here would admit this too, is that we need help. I need help. So Phil's doing his doctoral studies, and every time we get on, we ask him, well, what have you been reading and stuff? Because why? It's expanding his brain. And then when he talks to us and shares with us, helps expand ours. And so that's why we're fully on board with dialogue. New Wine is about dialogue. Life is dialogic, right? It's this interrelation between our narratives, and so often those narratives are competing. We were just talking about this. Phil was just relating one of the books that he's reading, and about this idea of the innovation of the church, but then how that quickly becomes competition of the church, whether it's with worship music that you choose, or calling the service a service or worship time or gathering, things like this. And so as we go into the church, the Christmas celebrations today, are we, meaning Christians, the church of Christianity, are we producing sounds of joy, or are the sounds coming from the church just humbug, in your estimation? And then how does the church continue to proclaim joy to the world in the midst of COVID and political unrest, rising inflation, all these? How can there still be joy amidst this? So where are we at with Christmas 2021? Where, in your estimation, where is the church, and how does the church help people to see that there really is something to celebrate in this God who becomes baby, as Phil said last week? God becomes baby, creator of all things becomes baby. That seems absurd. So where is there joy this Christmas season?
Wow, everyone's quiet. What happened? Dead air. We can't have that. So, one of the things that I'm seeing now, of course, is and this is just a repeated thing, working where I work, you see people's generosity so much this time of year. Because we had some troubles a couple of weeks ago, and so this was our first week of having our meal groups come back. And guys are very excited to have meal groups back. The meal groups are happy to be back. And then again, this is also Christmas, and so we're planning our just meal groups coming for Christmas and Christmas Eve and things like that. And it's like, whoa, this is so crazy. We had a couple of donors just call the harbor and say, hey, we want to give you guys a bunch of shoes. What's everyone's shoe size? So it's like, we're gonna another church came and said, hey, we want to give everyone coats. Just give me sizes for every guy so we can give them brand new coats. And it's just generosity all over the place. But one of the things we emphasize with our guys this time of year is that although they're in the posture of receiving some of these gifts, that they need to be generous too. Need to be generous with their time, with their story, with just being who they are and not shutting down during this time of year. And for some of the guys, it can be difficult. There's a lot of guys, they do have experienced trauma that led them to the addiction that they're in. And so this time of year can be a challenge. And so that becomes part of the conversation too. Like, how much is this year a challenge? We have a gentleman that works every single Christmas because of that reason. Christmas can be a challenge for so many guys. So he's there on call. He's there just to have conversations with guys to help them through the day. So yeah, you see both sides where this can be a challenge. This can, bring up trigger trauma kind of stuff. But the same token, you see so much generosity that it can't be ignored. That you may want to be screamed bah humbug, but you can't ignore the generosity that so many people are showing. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we see it in the churches around like the holiday times, whether it's Thanksgiving with the like give a turkey, or with Christmas, there's like the Operation Child stuff where you pick an ornament and you get to or fill out a shoebox, for the different children. And you see these different things that happen around the holidays where we do get to step in and we do get to give. But I wish that it happened year round. I wish that it wasn't just a Christmas thing to give a 5-year-old a pair of pajamas, because they need those things year round. And I'm sure that your guys would appreciate shoes and coats at other times other than Christmas, but there is celebration of that generosity in the moment, in the season. There is that thankfulness of like, yes, let's come together and let's participate in giving and receiving with one another. But how can we step into this? How can we step into that joy of the world, Christ with us, Emmanuel, year round? How can we, what does that look like as the church? Why can't we have, ornaments with children's names on it in the lobby year round? So that would be my struggle with it, even though it's awesome to take part in this joy and generosity right now. I wish that it carried past the Christmas season.
Mm. Yeah, I think I was talking to someone just a couple days ago about how to balance, the celebration of Jesus in Christmas, because when you go into Target, when you go into Walmart, when you go into Kohl's, any of the stores, there's obviously people getting together, they're grabbing things for celebrations, right? But what they're grabbing there's, at least in the stores that we're around, there's nothing specifically Jesus about it, right? You to go into Target, they don't have, in fact, it's strange. In none of these stores, and maybe the stores don't sell them anymore, Bibles, around the Christmas stuff even. So maybe they have them in the book area. I guess I haven't really looked, to be honest with you. I haven't bought a Bible from Target or Walmart. But so there's nothing like specifically Jesus-y about it. And yet I can see where the language goes back and forth between, is this holiday season? Is this Christmas season? Is this winter celebrations? Some of the discussions I've been seeing in some of the universities and colleges is, do we call this winter celebration, end of this semester, because there's been pushback with Christmas, and then there's been pushback with holiday because not everyone celebrates a holiday during this time. And so I feel like for a lot within the Christian realm, there's a confusion. Like, we want to embrace the world in love. Okay, so you don't want to be, I'm all about that relational aspect where we're not coming in with our Bibles and smacking people around and making them feel like, maybe during other time periods of the church's history where it was that fire and brimstone and, hey, you're a sinner and you're a piece of crap, and if you're not following our ways. And so I think there's the push against that, where the Christian doesn't want to seem cold and unloving. And yet then if we fully embrace the truth of who Jesus is, sometimes then it seems like we're a fanatic, and you come from some sort of fanatical cultish kind of thing. And so how to balance that, and it doesn't help me when I go into Target and Kohl's and these stores where there's celebration on the mind, but it's not, I wouldn't say that it's focused on Jesus, but that doesn't mean that I can't go participate that. It brings to mind Paul's words where he says, I became all things to all men. So what does that look like? When we had this beautiful talk, New Wine participates. We have a room on Clubhouse, the mobile app. And this last Tuesday, we have a room that opens up every Tuesday, 8:30 to 9:30. We discuss this kind of stuff. And one of the New Wine leaders, not only is she a professional clown, but during the Christmas season, because she understands it's a way to step into families that might not have any interaction with the church, she plays Mrs. Claus. And it's weird because, like she was saying, like, you have to really be careful what Christian group you're in before you announce that, like, to find out where they're at. And it made me think, like, wait, do we judge one another so harshly that we can't even be the joy to the world that the church is called to, because we're afraid of not being judged by the world? We're afraid of being judged by one another. So do we take away our own cheer from within the church because we're not unified on Christ? And so we look at each other, like C.S. Lewis says in Screw Tape Letters, the senior devil tells the junior devil, one of the ways to get the church off and Christians out of sync is to get them to look down the row that they're sitting in and start to compare. That comparison, Phil, you and I were talking about that with the book that you were reading, where like there's good that comes into the church. And once we start to compare and look towards the right and to the left, that's when, whether it's sin or the deconstruction of what could be good starts to happen. And so how do we encourage each other not to be in that space?
Yeah, no, defining to use Christian as an adjective on something, to be as a Christian holiday. The book you were just, or the conversation we were mentioning is around a book on Christian innovation. Like what makes it Christian, that kind of thing. And so that becomes kind of the thing. Is it something that we have to plaster on top of something, or is it something that we carry in our hearts as we do something? So, our dear sister that does that works as a clown as well. And she's a pastor too, which is so very interesting. But first, to do that work and to be a Christian clown going into something, she doesn't go into something as a Christian clown. She goes in as a clown. But Christ is in her heart, and that's how she ministers and works through people. She understands that putting on that makeup allows her to have place in people's lives, at least for a moment, that you wouldn't necessarily just have going in with your Bible and a tract saying, hey, I want to lead you to Jesus. But she's able to show and demonstrate some love and care and concern for people with that makeup on, that we're not used in spaces where we're not able to go, in hospital rooms and just in parades and wherever else she does. So So how we carry our Christian faith into circles becomes the interesting thing. Do we have to plaster it on our foreheads, or is it something that we carry in our hearts? And as people talk to us, they're like, hey, you sound different. Your conversation sounds like something that I'm not accustomed to. Why is that? And we can now give them a reason for our hope. So
the reason for the hope is key too. And it's the way we do it, right? Like, I was talking to someone back in October, it feels like it was decades ago, about Halloween. And I dig Halloween. I like the fun of it, and just and I was talking to Kayla too about her and her husband just got back from Disney World, and they were in this part where they were building, lightsabers or something, and they were watching the kids, here her and her husband in their early 20s, and they're having a good time. But then, like she was saying, like watching some of these kids, just the joy and like the reminder of like, oh my gosh, like that's what it feels like. There's something infectious about that. And that's for me, like with Halloween, I just, when the anticipation and anxiety within them before they ring the doorbell, like, oh my gosh. And then when you open it and you're fun and you embrace them and receive them, then they receive that whole movement, and there's just joy there, and you can feel it with the kids. And like when Kayla was just telling us and bringing us into those stories, like I felt the joy even in that room, even though it happened already, and she was just recounting it. And I feel like that's the joy that the church is meant to have, because there's this baby that he is going to grow up and become something that is the most disgusting and downright degrading thing that can happen to us as humans. And he does that because of this love that is the most unheard of, the most magnificent. And he does that to embrace us so that we would embrace his joy. That's one of the weeks that we celebrate, the third week of Advent. So I try to think, what is it that I do though that causes me to where I am not that joy and I become, humbug?
Wow. Halloween. Matt, let's lay hands on Matt right now. We're going to pray for Matt. I guess a couple things I think about. One, is that I think we're being so in the past, at least for myself, you're being so cautious because you don't want to offend anybody, right? Because Christians have a bad name of like offending people. So we walk around and we try to find the rhythm of the other person. So it's like, okay, are they going to say happy holidays? Or are they going to say Merry Christmas? Which we can say, hey, Merry Christmas. Or else if they just say happy holidays, do we just say happy holidays? But there's some people that just are always saying Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas. And you know what? It brings a smile to my face. I mean, and I think, maybe that's part of the humbug part of it, is because we're trying to navigate, whether it be the world or even other Christians, we're trying to navigate something that it really is joyous. I mean, Christmas is like awesome. It's like Halloween. I agree with you. I mean, Halloween is awesome. And I think I heard a guy talk, it was on YouTube just a couple of weeks ago, and he said this, he says, people aren't going to remember what you say. People aren't going to necessarily remember what you do, but people will remember how you made them feel. And I think, and that is so true, because, there's, even in music, you hear music and it makes you feel a certain way, or it takes you to a certain place that puts a smile on your face. But, I had a great Christmas growing up. I mean, I know there's some people where it wasn't as great. I mean, and there were some Christmases that were really hard. I remember being sick when my family went to Hawaii. I was sick on, just before they left, I ended up staying home. Luckily, I was in college. I don't think they would have left me alone. But I mean, there's memories, right? I mean, you talked about a memory of a feeling of Halloween. And for me, there's like these memories and there are these feelings. And I think that's what the disconnect is. It's that, you can't have those feelings because that might not be Christian, or else you're told that, that's not Christian. I mean, Mrs. Claus, I mean, give me a break, right? I mean, when you saw Santa as a kid, you're just like, well, I guess there's a time where you're terrified. You don't want to go up there. Your parents are dragging you up there so you can have, a picture of yourself crying on Santa's lap. But you know what? There's a point where it just brings joy. And so the fact that the church, or we as Christians are trying to navigate, trying to appease everybody, but maybe we just, what's ever in our heart, we just need to say, Merry Christmas, and, and just let it fall where it falls. I mean, with our sister, wanting to do Mrs. Claus, I mean, do Mrs. Claus. And if churches have an issue with it, say, okay, knock the dust off your oversized clown feet, and go to the next place where people love Mrs. Claus. And so, maybe the issue is we have forgotten what it feels like. Maybe, as a church, we're so worried about presenting ourselves that we forget, what does it feel like? What is our experience as a child? Because those are significant experiences.
Yeah, I mean, part of the joy that we get from like watching kids comes from their curiosity, right? Like they feel everything, they want to experience everything, and a lot of times that means putting things in their mouth, but they are so curious about the world, and they're in like awe, this just constant state of like wonder of the world and around them, and the people too, and how it makes them feel and how they interact. And I think that you're right, Jim. Like if we get back to the feeling of it, where is our heart in Christmas? What is our intention? The intention of Mrs. Claus is not to be, super like gung-ho Santa, this is what Christmas is about, but rather the intention is to go interact with these people and have these interactions of joy and love. And so if that's where our heart is at, if those are the feelings that we're focusing on, then maybe we can step, into the different situations and allow that to be the case. If we sit back and learn from these children, watch their joy and their excitement, and try to just pause and allow ourselves to stop being so critical and, bah humbug, and instead sit in the moment and be like, yeah, you know what? This is really cool. Like, look at that. Look at the stars. Look at the sky. Look at this world around us that our God has created. Like, how wonderful it is to be with one another. If we start sitting in those moments and start feeling that, then we do feel the Merry Christmas. And then we can step out and share that with others.
And I think that's, especially Advent, we talked about Advent, and I think the rhythm of Advent, the lighting of candles, the message of hope and things like that, and even the Christ candle being able, and, one of the traditions for our church was, is lighting candles, dimming the lights, lighting candles, and singing, Silent Night. And I remember even as a child, we were not churchgoers. I mean, my dad was kind of like a Jack Mormon, and mom was, belonged to the Congregational Church, but we were like Christmas and Easter people. But you know what? Yeah. We went to the midnight service and we got to light candles, we got to dress up. And so that was once a year, but there's something magical about it, something special about it that, we always look forward to. And even when I look back, so, even when we do the candlelight service, I think, man, that, that's meaningful. I mean, it's meaningful for a lot of people because, they show up and they say, I love this. And so there's, I think within the church is to, especially during Advent, granted there's that humbug, but I think opportunities of, Advent, right? Including people to light the Advent candle. Hey, share about your family. What are some family traditions? And so I think, the church can, establish like these traditions, right? These things that maybe people only go to church once a year, like I did growing up, but there's these things that you can kind of look forward to, and that's going to be there, or else you think back and you think, wow, that was really cool. So I think the church has lots of opportunity. We have really a lot of opportunities, especially during Christmas. But like, like Phil and Kayla said, the generosity needs to go year round, right? I mean, we need to take shoes, we need to gift kids, we need to give coats, we need to be generous year round. But definitely, I mean, there is something, and to say it's it is around the birth of Jesus. We recognize the goodness. We recognize the generosity. We recognize why we do this. We recognize that the Father gave us everything. I mean, he put it all on the table for us. And so, granted, it's hard to walk through, or go through the stores and, see the non, but you know what, the heart of the celebration, the heart of the celebration is a baby, is our hope, is baby made flesh, right? Or God made baby, maybe, if you will. So.
Yeah, a couple of things that are coming to mind as Jim, you were sharing, Kayla, you're sharing as well. So first with Jim, as you mentioned in your earlier comment that that the church tries to avoid offending people. I think that's like kind of a fatal flaw. It's like we should be for something, not against. We should be not trying to avoid, offending people, but for showing love, for showing generosity, those kind of things. And so that, I think, is just kind of a flaw that we kind of have in how we do things. If we're actually trying to step into something, that should kind of be the attitude, that we're stepping into love, that we're not trying to avoid hate. So yeah, say Merry Christmas, say what you need to demonstrate love to someone else. But back in Kayla's comment, the notion that as we get older, we lose that wonder, we lose that want to investigate and learn things, because we've been bitten by we've been bitten or hurt so often that we're like, you know what, I'm gonna protect myself now. But this notion, the whole notion of I want to protect myself and not go and just demonstrate love to others. That is something as a church that's not, we're not following Christ's example when we do that. Because he didn't walk into, in front of Pilate. He didn't walk into him saying, hey, Pilate, hey, do what you need to do, and cower away. No, he went in as Jesus, do what you need to do. And just look him square in the face, do what you need to do. And not, knowing that what's on the other end of it. And just the whole mission that Jesus had and coming to this world and how he lived was just facing fully the reality of our sin, so he can end up on that cross. And it's just, man, we should be for something, not trying to avoid things, not trying to protect ourselves, but should be for something. And then something should be showing love, should be showing generosity, showing the things that Christ has shown us, that God has shown us. So, no.
Yeah.
I want to really quickly jump on the Kayla bandwagon. I mean, let's have hats made with her name. I think, maybe what she brought up too, I think it's imagination, because, with Santa Claus and Christmas, I mean, it's the imagination, right? Watching the star, watching these lightsabers. I mean, there is something magical about being at Disneyland. I mean, you throw everything out the window. As an adult, you're walking around with Mickey Mouse ears. You're excited when there's something magical about that. And I think, and it's our imagination kicking in, and maybe it's that childhood thing. And I think, by us losing our imagination when it comes to things like Christmas, and maybe the word is mystery, right? I mean, we wanted to find what mystery is, and and maybe that's the sad part that has crept into our church is the mystery, right? I mean, there's the mystery and the imagination of what God could do. I mean, even when we talk about the Holy Spirit, there's a time when the Holy Spirit's just like, I don't know, but now everybody says, oh yeah, the Holy Spirit's going to do this for you. They've defined what the Holy Spirit is going to do instead of just kind of like live in the mystery, right? The mysteriousness of God. And so I think that, I really do appreciate that, Kayla and Phil. I think it is the imagination. I think that's maybe the dangerous thing that's crept into the church is not having any more mystery, is that piece of it.
The awe. Yeah. Was talking to my son he's a philosophy major in university, and we were talking about the lack of awe when it comes to philosophers and even some theologians when they're talking about God. We've lost that awe and wonder that you're talking about, Jim, the mystery. And if you go back, part of this stuff that I was looking at when I did my doctoral work was the imagination, creativity. And you go back and you look at some of the early English translations, 1600s or so, and what became negative or pejorative when the mind went astray was the imagination. And so when we let the imagination run awry, that was down darkness and negativity and sin. And so then this push against the imaginative started to happen. And so we are left with what you're saying right now, Jim, is that we all know it's like how eternity is within us. Imagination is within us. There's not even the most staunchest humbug, person. You can't tell me that they don't look at those little kids running around with thinking that they can fly, that they're a stormtrooper or whatever with the lightsabers, and that deep within them, if they were truly honest with themselves, there's a little thing that smiles and says, I want that again, and so that awe. And I think, isn't that the beauty of this story of this that you were saying, Jim, this God becomes flesh, dawns flesh, but not just flesh, like as the 20, 30-year-old, right? Starts as the baby so that there can be this progression. I can only imagine what toddler Jesus must have been like running around, is reminding his parents of the awe and wonder of this creation and this creation, and and then pointing at other people and saying, I don't know what his first words would have been, like maybe likeness, imago Dei, I don't know, maybe he's he's Jesus, so I gotta believe that maybe his first words were something probably pretty profound, bless you, mother, father, I don't know, but there was this awe, of baby Jesus. And do we allow ourselves to have that awe of baby Jesus? Like, holy crap, there's this song from Reliant K that says, you were born to die, that you came, and do I celebrate this day that God chose to be born only to die for my sake? And I feel like there's this weirdness within the Christian realm of, if we focus too much, I was reading some of these bloggers, I probably shouldn't, Twitter is a weird world, but there's this conversation going on about Advent. Is Advent focusing on love, peace, hope, joy? It's too bright. It's too, and what really they were trying to argue is that the original candles were death and hell and heaven and judgment, because we need to remind ourselves that what Christ came to do was to weed out this darkness. I'm like, so I feel like that's the problem, is like there's one side of the Christian world that says, I must become nothing. I must non-exist because my flesh, my humanness is so dark and evil that it's no good. And then the other side of it says, don't deny your flesh and your humanness because you are good. You are created in the image of God. And so there's this battle going on. And so one side says, everything's got to be joy, 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 joy. The other side says, no, darkness, darkness. We need to understand the sin that we're in. And we feel this battle. And so then the rest of us are like, what is it? What should our focus be? If Jesus is our focus, what did he do? He became sin, but he also became, he's joy for us and peace and hope. So it's like, isn't that a celebratory thing? And yet I think as the Christian, we're like, wait, sin is bad. Wait, Christmas good. Okay, so can I celebrate, when a baby was born to die, right? So it's like, how do I celebrate without missing the truth of what he, kind of thing? I feel like that's where the Christian tends to be, is like, oh, but if I'm too happy, that means I'm not recognizing how bad sin is.
And maybe that's the piece of, at least understanding what the Christian calendar is, right? I mean, Advent is that anticipation. And I mean, that's what is the joy. That is what the hope is. I mean, it's based on, those candles are based on this Advent, this anticipation of God showing up. But it's a celebration for us in this time of just, especially now, is that, he is going to show up. That's his promise to us. And so that there is hope, there is light, there is love, there is joy, there is peace, because in the midst of all this darkness, in the midst of all this crap, there is hope. There are these things that we can anticipate. I mean, you know what? Save it for Lent. I mean, if you want to talk about darkness and stuff, save it for Lent. But I mean, I think maybe that's what's out of whack, because everybody goes, is that right. we compartmentalize, right? So we focus on one thing, but when you look at the bigger picture, it's like, okay, Advent makes sense. Okay, Lent makes sense. Finally, there's kind of this, the resurrection shows up, so that, at least you're not left in darkness. But I mean, really, give me a break. I mean, okay, let's light the black candle. Okay, so today we're celebrating gloom. It's like, okay, hey, all right.
And they forget mourning was supposed to be a joyful, like there's a joy in mourning, right?
Yeah, we call it a celebration of life, right? I mean, isn't that the mystery? I mean,
the awe and wonder, right?
Yeah, I mean, for the Hawaiian culture, the Po is like the beginning. So, in darkness in Hawaiian culture is like, it's an anticipation. I mean, because something good emerges out of that. New birth emerges out of that. So in Hawaiian culture, when people talk about darkness, it's not like, okay, that's bad. But it's a transition. And so there is, that there is something on the other side. So. It's story, right? I mean, it's story. It's a bigger picture than just saying candles and what they represent, but it's a story.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kayla, I know you're going to say it, or Phil.
No, Phil's.
It's all good. He does it again. But also the notion that things don't always have to be either or. Like, yes, we have hope, we have joy. Yes, but those things does come from the backdrop of there was something that led us to hope. There was something responding to the joy. So there can be a both and standing in the middle and living in that tension as well, where we don't have to choose one or the other. Why do we have to argue about it? There's no reason to argue about that. Jesus is here. We don't have to argue about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, even you were talking about your reading, Phil, and the concept of greater is not necessarily, in comparison, it's not necessarily like a greater than, above, more than, superior to. It's just great. So same with darkness, the concept of darkness, I feel like we have this, we attach like evil and like it's empty and it's barren, it's bad. There's a negative aspect to darkness, and it's just the absence of light. Like there is no light, and that can be devastating depending on where you're at. But if you know that the light is coming again, that it's not going to be endless darkness, then the darkness itself is not necessarily this negative thing. It just is. And I feel like that's, why can't we just with Christmas, right? Like, yes, there's going to be judgment. And is that not also who Christ is, right? The ultimate, like God is the ultimate judge, and there's not bad, like judgment in and of itself is not evil. But we are not supposed to be the judge. We're not supposed to walk around during Christmas and be like, well, they do Santa in their house, so they must not be real Christians, and I feel like that's where we get to. Like, even walking around Disney World, you see all these, it's so hard not to be in that state of judgment, because everything in me screams like, look at man, those parents, the family, like it is just this cesspool for judgment. And yet there is so much joy, and there is that element of like the magic and the awe that you see in these children's faces. I remember the candlelit service, Christmas Eve. It will always be such a fun memory. In Scotland, one year we rounded up the entire cul-de-sac of children. I think there were easily like 10 of us. And we walked, it was like a 15-minute walk to and from church. So the whole neighborhood, we walked there, and we got our candles. And then the whole way back home, we just, kept relighting each other's and making sure, shielding them from the wind and the snow. And it was just so fun to participate in that together. And I think that we get away from that. We allow the fear of offending people to get in the way of relating with one another and taking interest and, accepting like, hey, you know what, like you have something special, and there is something to be in awe of with each other and around us in this season of Christmas. Like there is that joy, regardless of if we want to acknowledge that there is a joy.
And the crazy truth is that some of the folks that we walked to church with in Scotland, some of those kids, they are not believers in Christ. In fact, a couple of them like play in a heavy metal band that is, I think their name is, Hell, and then the F word, like it is, it is pure Scottish. It is like straight up, but it's a beautiful thing because they still interact with us, and they're still interested, and we're interested in what they're doing too. And we come from different perspectives in the sense of what we believe is truth, but there's a dialogue there where there's a willingness to embrace the other's world because we have that relational truth. Sometime, like Kayla was saying, is there was an invitation, whether it was because they, like you were saying, Jim, when you grew up, we talk about in the church, the CEO Christians, right? Christmas, Easter, and optional. I don't know if that's okay that Christians have labels that we put on people who go to church, 3 times or 4, whatever. It's a way to recognize, but even folks like that, there's still an openness that if we're willing to embrace as Jesus embraced me, there's never a time where I read or in my times of prayer where I'm encountering this Godhead where I feel like a piece of crap. I've never had in times of prayer where the Lord has made me feel that way. And so it's a weird a realm that we find ourselves in, because Jim, like when you're talking about, and we've been talking about like this feeling of joy, there's the other side of the theology world would say, hey, we got to be careful, because if it's all about feelings lead us astray. And that's what, back in the 4th century with the church father Augustine, he said, love God and live as you wish. And that through everyone in the church, they're like, whoa, we can't tell people live how you want. And he said, but if the first thing is that they love the Lord their God, that will guide then how they live if they truly do what? Love the Lord their God. And so sometimes I wonder if during Christmas, with the Advent season before then, the church needs to have a time of pause, of silence and prayer, so as to prepare ourselves. Because I feel like during Christmas, Easter, and these things, we don't understand the depth of it because we haven't prepared ourselves enough beforehand. We just jam right into it, just like the rest of culture, and so all of a sudden we're like, holy crap, it's Advent, what are you doing? Oh my, and it feels so rushed, because that's how we are, because we've never stopped and gone, we're coming into some serious celebration, reflection, meditation, all of this in pause. But that's not the way the world is. The world, especially the American culture, is go, 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 go. What are you doing? Get out there, open up, regardless of. What if the church led the way and said, hey, we're going to do this, but we need to pause for a few weeks and just stop and have services where it was seriously an hour's worth of prayer and chanting, through the Psalms or something like that, where we paused and reflected upon our souls, like did soul care. I don't know if the church is willing to stop long enough.
And some traditions do that. Some traditions are doing that. Not every tradition does that. And a lot of our worship experiences are just that. They're an experience each week. And they're a new experience each week. And there may not be too much space for pausing and reflection and the things that we should be doing in Advent and during Lent. And just, these are the seasons that, we're thinking of just the church calendar and just how we live. There is a rhythm that we have as a church that we should be living into regularly. And I don't know if we take the advantage. I don't know if every tradition takes the advantage of living into that pace that we have, where we have Advent and Lent and the other times of the year that we have to slow down and pause. So, yeah.
And this is exactly where we find ourselves with New Wine and Uncorked, for sure. As we step into it, we want to find ways to pause. And so we have, next week will be the 17th. We will meet on the 17th, but then the 24th and the 31st are times where we're going to pause. But next week we want to talk about this, just preparing for the Christmas message. And so next week we'll be we'll be discussing this, how we do with the Uncorked and topics. But more than that, we're going to want to really specifically talk about, okay, so the week before, what are some things that we should be looking for or noticing around us that really do amplify the truth of what it means to be a follower of Christ, preparing for the arrival of their King and the Messiah. So we, invite you to join us next Friday, 17th. We'll be right here again on Facebook from 10 to 11 Pacific Standard Time. So, hey, invite a friend. You can just use that share button right below the video, and you could share it to your Facebook page or share it to a friend's page and invite them in. And then to the right of the video, you see that space for interaction, and you can type in your comments or chats or questions even. Because it's not often that you get three people like Phil and Jim and Kayla where you can just tap into their brain power. And so that's what we do every Friday. You can tap into, because there's the pastoral, there's the academic, and there's just the relational truth that each one of us is coming to New Wine Uncorked with. And that's the truth of New Wine. So if you want to know more about New Wine, New Wineskins, go to new-wineskins.org, and that's our website. And you can sign up for a newsletter, or right here on the Facebook page, just hit like, and then all the activities that I talked about at the beginning, anytime anything comes about for New Wine, you'll see it on our Facebook page, and you can join us, whether you're in the Portland area or somewhere around the nation, because New Wine is something where it's spreadable. You know, just like wine pours out and goes through the different crevices, so too does the message of Jesus Christ. And that's what New Wine is rooted in. In Christ and through the Spirit, we seek to go into contemporary culture and build relational bridges. And so thank you for joining us today in our talk of Christmas. Join us next week as we finish up the talk of, it'll be the last New Wine Uncorked, believe it or not, for 2021. You know, we'll be jumping in on 2022, but thanks again for joining us. So we'll see you next week. On behalf of Phil and Jim and Kayla, I'm Matt. This has been another edition of New Wine Uncorked. See you on the flip side.
Hey, Matt, really quickly, can I know you're trying to close. I didn't want to interrupt you earlier, but
we got no schedule, no nothing, brother.
I know, let me toss this out, because you know what, we brought up a lot of great things. I mean, I think, you know, it's about, you know, you talked about slowing the rhythm, right? And kind of like, instead of rushing through this. And so, you know, we talked about it. Maybe what we can do is, as we close, we can share maybe, you know, an experience that we find, or something that we do that maybe would help our listeners, and then maybe slowing down the rhythm and just taking it easier. And I'm not, you know, and maybe it's, I guess part of it's not being necessarily spiritual, but it's just the rhythm is slowing down. And so, you know, I mean, I'll go ahead and start off. You know, for me, my dad passed away 10 years ago, but I was going to the hospital a lot. And so I was listening to a lot of Christmas music, but the Christmas music, especially on K103, which is a local station, you know, Christmas music has just been very special for me, because of those times I would sit quietly waiting to go see my dad, and just that anticipation of visiting with him. And so I find, especially like Christmas music, very calming. It slows me down, because, you know, going to see my dad in a hospital, that slows you down. But, you know, the other thing for me is Christmas lights. You know, I mean, just walking, you know, we talk about it all over the place, but you know what, there's just something magical about Christmas lights when you walk and see Christmas lights. And so, you know, for me, one of the things that kind of just slows my pace down is just being able to walk and enjoy Christmas lights. And just, you know, maybe one of the things is just reflecting on your own childhood. What are the things that brought you joy? What are the things that you remember as just having a lot of fun? And I would encourage just to reflect upon saying, Lord, thank you. Thank you for, you know, those moments in my life that you provided this type of joy. And so maybe that's my offering, maybe to slow down, is just maybe listen, you know, take time, listen to Christmas music, and just take a walk through an area with Christmas lights, and reflect about just the joy that you had and when Christmas was magical, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, and I'll jump into that. And then this is what we want to do for next week as well, because I agree with you, Jim. I think sometimes we need to learn from the ways in which they learn how to pause. And one of the things we do in our family is, as we get the Christmas stuff out, we are totally the nativity scenes. We try to get one nativity scene each year, you know, just cool ones. But as we're putting them out, and you say this over spiritualizing things, or we try to make it we want it to be a spiritual thing. So as the nativities are bringing out, my wife will get them out, and we'll remember, do you remember when we got this and how cool it was? And we set it up, and in each of the nativity scenes, we're able to talk, we had it here when we were at this place, or this, you know, and so it's a recollection of what God has done through our midst. Just as we remember, like the birth of Jesus, we remember that, when we celebrated the birth of Jesus here at this place, it was kind of like a new birth. And so it's an awesome time to go through you're right. We have to pause and go through, and we try to be intentional.
Wow, you know, I don't know if I have many things that I kind of do to slow down. A couple of years ago, when I first started pastoring, my first time pastoring, that was the first time I ever had to celebrate Advent. I had no idea. It's something we just didn't do at church. We celebrated Christmas at church, but we never did Advent. And so I never really developed a rhythm where now I've done it every year since. but it hasn't really been, it's kind of been preparing for other people to do it. It's been kind of weird. I haven't necessarily even kind of internalized it. There are things that I do. I'm an introvert, so I need solitude in order to kind of recharge. So I do things to slow down in rhythm of life, but not necessarily particularly around Advent. So yeah, that may be something I'm have to think about more as I go forward.
I remember another thing that we did also as a family was one of our nativity scenes was an Advent wreath. And so each night or each week of Advent, we would, after dinner, we would get to light the candle and walk through that week. And like, what does that look like living out, whatever it was, whether it was the joy or the hope or the love, what does that look like in our lives and how are we going to live that out? And it was just a time, kind of like a time of reflection and kind of devotion too, like do a little devotional around it. And we would read, scripture and walk through the story of Jesus and his birth throughout those weeks of Advent. And it's just a cool time to pause and reflect.
Yeah, and Jim, that's a great activity for us to do, is just to pause. And this is what we want to do next week, is to pause and go through what are some of the ways that we can prepare our hearts, and this will be part of the discussion too, before we close Clubhouse on Tuesdays, where we meet 8:30 to 9:30 in the morning. And Clubhouse is a discussion app where we get on there and we're talking through this. What are some of the things that Christians can do to remind ourselves, and that's where the storytelling, man, the narrative, the telling the stories of what God has been doing in our midst. And so, Jim, I appreciate you stopping and pausing for that. That was a good reminder. So join us next week as we do this for the whole of New Wine Uncorked. Next Friday is where we're going to pause. And this is a way for you to join us. You can interact through the comments on Facebook. And some of the ways maybe you have learned to pause throughout your walk with Christ, in ways that you have noticed then when he steps in, when we pull back a little bit, and say, okay, Spirit, open us up. And so, as always, we appreciate the interaction and appreciate just the willingness to do this together, because we really are in this together. So again, on behalf of Phil and Jim and Kayla, Matt, and this has been another edition of New Wine Uncorked. Join us next week, though, as we do step further into Christmas 2021, and how do we pause just to allow for that truth of Jesus to infect us, so that the celebration of hope and joy and peace and love just ooze from the truth of who we are. So join us next Friday. This has been another edition of New Wine Uncorked. Until next Friday, we'll see you on the flip side. Have a good one.